My boyfriend left me to die in the desert because he couldn't be man enough to tell me he had someone else. I came back to him as a ghost. The sky looked endless that morning, the kind of blue that makes you believe anything is possible. When Ethan pulled up in front of my apartment, windows down, music blasting, and a grin stretched across his face, I thought I was looking at the man I'd fallen in love with all over again. The one who used to plan surprises, who made me laugh until my stomach hurt. "Pack light," he'd texted the night before. "Once-in-a-lifetime adventure tomorrow. Be ready at 8. He wouldn't say where we were going. I'd asked, of course, 3 times, maybe 4, but he just smiled that secret smile of his and said, "Trust me." So I did. We drove for hours. The city faded behind us like a dream, replaced by long stretches of desert and shimmering heat. I leaned out the window, letting the dry wind whip through my hair, singing along to whatever came on the radio. Ethan didn't sing. He used to, but that day, he only smiled and watched the road like it was something sacred. "You're being weird," I said, laughing. "Weird how?" "Quiet, mysterious, like a serial killer in a romantic comedy." He smirked, tapping the steering wheel. "That's a very specific genre." I rolled my eyes, took a picture of him anyway, his face half in sunlight, half in shadow. I didn't realize until later how fitting that photo was. The desert went on forever. Miles of cracked earth and twisted brush, dotted with the occasional gas station that looked abandoned long before we were born. Every now and then I'd catch him looking at me, his eyes softer than usual, almost sad. When I asked what was wrong, he'd just shake his head and say, "Nothing. You look happy." "I am happy," I told him. "You're finally doing something spontaneous. It's a miracle." He laughed at that, but it wasn't real laughter. I could tell. Something about the way he gripped the wheel made me uneasy. His knuckles were white, tense. His jaw flexed every time I mentioned how much I missed our old trips, back when things were easy. I thought maybe he was stressed about work or about us. Things had been strange lately, distant. Still, I wanted to believe this trip meant something good. Maybe he was trying to fix things. Maybe this was his way of saying, "I still love you." "Ethan," I said after a long silence, "are we okay?" He blinked, like I'd startled him. "What do you mean?" "You've been, I don't know, different." He looked at me for a second too long before turning back to the road. "Yeah, we're fine." It didn't sound like the truth, but I let it go. I told myself he was just tired. By afternoon, the heat became almost unbearable. The air conditioner struggled to keep up, blowing more dust than cool air. I tied my hair up, wiped sweat from my neck, and laughed about how I'd melt before we even arrived. Ethan didn't laugh this time. "Where are we going?" I pressed again. "You'll see," he said softly. "You'll love it." Something in his tone made me stop asking. We passed a hand-painted sign that read, "Last gas for 60 miles. I pointed it out, joking that we were about to starve in the desert, but he didn't slow down. Just kept driving, the music playing low, his fingers tapping to no rhythm at all. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I woke, the landscape had changed. No more road, just dirt and sand stretching endlessly. The car bounced along uneven ground, and the sun was starting to dip, painting everything in copper light. "Ethan," I said, blinking away sleep. "Where are we?" He smiled faintly. "Almost there." "Almost where?" "You'll see." The wind howled outside, scattering dust across the windshield. It felt like we were driving to the edge of the world. My chest tightened. Finally, he stopped the car at the top of a ridge, overlooking what looked like a dry lake. The air shimmered with heat, and the silence was so deep I could hear my pulse in my ears. I stepped out, stretching my legs, laughing at how surreal it all felt. "You brought me to Mars," I said, turning in a slow circle. "It's beautiful. Empty. But beautiful." He leaned against the car, watching me. His expression was unreadable, not cold, not warm, just distant. "Take a picture," he said. "You'll want to remember this." I lifted my camera, snapping shots of the endless horizon, the cracked earth, the faint line of the car behind me. "What about one together?" I asked. "Self-timer?" "In a minute," he said. "Let me grab something from the car first." I nodded, not thinking twice. I turned back toward the view, adjusting my lens. The light was perfect, that golden dying kind that photographers dream about. I lifted the camera and clicked once, twice, 3 times. Then I heard it, the sound of the car door slamming. "Wait," I said, lowering the camera. "What are you—" The engine roared to life. For a second, I thought he was joking. He'd done things like this before, driven off a few meters just to make me chase him, laughing, but the sound grew distant, fast. Dust whipped around me, stinging my eyes. "Ethan!" I called, waving through the haze. "Okay, very funny." No answer. The car was already shrinking into the horizon. My voice cracked as I shouted again, louder this time. "Ethan!" The sound of the engine faded until all I could hear was the wind. I stood there, camera hanging useless around my neck, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The desert stretched out in every direction, no shade, no sound, no sign of life. Just me. And for the first time, the thought crossed my mind. He wasn't coming back. The realization didn't hit all at once. It seeped in slowly, cold and sharp, spreading through my veins like poison. I told myself he'd turn around any second, that this was some elaborate prank or a test or a stupid fight I didn't know we were having. But as the minutes dragged into hours and the sun dipped lower, there was no sign of him. Only the fading tire tracks and the silence. I sank to my knees, the heat pressing against my skin, and finally understood. The perfect trip wasn't meant to be shared. It was meant to end here. At first I laughed. It was the kind of laugh that slips out when something makes no sense. Short, confused, too sharp. I told myself Ethan was just trying to scare me, maybe record my reaction for one of his stupid pranks. He'd circle back, grinning, pretending it was all in good fun. But the dust cloud where his car had vanished began to settle, and the sound of the engine was gone. The desert was silent again, crushingly, endlessly silent. "Ethan!" I shouted. My voice echoed off the emptiness. "Come on, enough!" Nothing. Only the hiss of wind and the dry rattle of sand shifting under my shoes. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course. I raised it higher, turning in a slow circle, like maybe I could catch a stray bar of reception floating in the heat. Nothing. My camera strap dug into my shoulder. The air pressed against me like a weight. The sun was sinking fast, spilling gold across the cracked earth. I decided to wait. He had to come back. He wouldn't really leave me, not here, not like this. We'd had fights before, but never cruelty, never that. The wind picked up, sharp and dry. I sat down on a flat rock near where we'd parked, hugging my knees. The desert turned colder as the light faded, the warmth draining away in minutes. The temperature drop was shocking, almost violent. I rubbed my arms, staring at the horizon until my eyes stung. Minutes became an hour, then 2. When darkness swallowed the sky, I finally stood up. I walked back and forth in the sand, tracing the path of the car's tire marks with my flashlight. My voice cracked as I shouted his name again. The echo that came back sounded like someone else's voice, smaller, frightened. I found my bag half buried near where I'd dropped it earlier. Inside were my camera, a half-empty water bottle, a granola bar, and my phone. That was it. No jacket, no map. It started to hit me then. A slow unraveling of belief. He wasn't coming back. The thought was absurd, impossible. Ethan, who once drove across town just to bring me soup when I was sick, couldn't have done this. Ethan, who used to say he couldn't sleep if we were fighting. But the memory of his face earlier, that strange calm, the way his smile never reached his eyes, replayed like a cruel answer. Something had been building in him for weeks, maybe months. I'd seen it but ignored it, convincing myself it was stress. Maybe it wasn't stress. Maybe it was hatred. The night grew colder. My teeth started to chatter. I sat on the ground, curling into myself, staring at the stars. They looked too close, too sharp, like they were watching. I don't know how long I sat there before the first wave of panic hit, sudden, physical. My chest tightened, breath catching. My body shook uncontrollably. I tried to calm myself, whispering that he'd be back, that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But the silence didn't change. When dawn came, it wasn't the beautiful kind. No soft light or warmth, just a merciless sun rising over an endless plain of pale dust. My mouth felt like sandpaper. I'd slept maybe 20 minutes, my dreams tangled with the sound of engines that weren't there. I started walking. At first, I followed the tire tracks. They led north, maybe toward a road, maybe toward nothing. My shoes filled with grit, my skin burned. Every few minutes I stopped, looked back, half expecting to see the car returning. It never did. Hours passed. My water ran out. I chewed the granola bar in tiny pieces, more for distraction than hunger. I tried to stay calm, counting my steps, telling myself stories, memories of the city, of our first date, of laughter and ordinary life. But each time I remembered him, it hurt worse. I thought about the way he'd looked at me just before leaving. There had been something final in it, like goodbye. The heat grew unbearable. The air shimmered so violently I couldn't tell where the land ended and the sky began. My shadow warped and stretched ahead of me like something alive. I stumbled more than once. My head pounded, my lips cracked. When I found a patch of shade under a jagged rock, I collapsed. My heartbeat felt too loud. I tried to sip the last drop of water, but there was none left. I laughed, dry, hollow laughter, and the sound scared me. That was when I started to think about why. What had I done? Had he found out about something? Did someone tell him a lie? We'd had small arguments, stupid things about work, about space, about how he thought I was distant. But this wasn't anger. This was punishment. The word stuck in my mind like a thorn. By evening, the sun was low again. My skin burned, my body ached, but I forced myself to move. Sitting still meant death. I kept walking until my vision blurred. When night fell again, I screamed his name, not because I expected an answer, but because I couldn't stand the silence anymore. The sound ripped from my throat, raw and wild, until I couldn't speak. I thought about the photo I'd taken right before he left. His car, the horizon, and me. A small smiling figure in the center. I imagined that image frozen forever, a cruel snapshot of trust. I lay down in the sand, shivering even as sweat clung to my skin. My body felt heavy, my mind drifting in and out of strange dreams. His face, the car, the way he'd said, "Take a picture." The last thing I remember before sleep claimed me was whispering into the night. "Why did you do it, Ethan?" The desert didn't answer. The desert didn't have a voice, but it could whisper. By morning, the wind had turned cruel, carrying thin blades of sand that cut against my skin. The sky was too bright, the ground too white. I tried to stand, but my legs trembled beneath me, weak from exhaustion. My mouth was dry enough that my tongue stuck to my teeth. I needed water, I needed shade, I needed someone. But there was only emptiness. I walked. Every step sank into the soft grit, stealing energy I didn't have. My shoes, now filled with sand, felt like weights. My lips had split overnight. I could taste blood every time I licked them. The horizon never changed. It just mocked me, stretching further each time I looked up, as if daring me to chase it. By noon, the heat was unbearable. The world shimmered in waves, bending light into mirages that played tricks on my mind. I saw water once, a glittering pool in the distance. I ran toward it until my lungs screamed, only to find cracked ground and dust. I fell to my knees, choking on sobs that barely made a sound. I thought of Ethan, not the one who left me here, but the one I used to know. The Ethan who kissed me under the rain, who held me close at night and whispered promises of forever. How could those hands, the same hands that once trembled when touching me, turn the key and drive away? My mind refused to accept it. There had to be another explanation. Maybe he'd gone for help. Maybe something happened. Maybe... No. The look in his eyes before he left said otherwise. It was deliberate, calm, decided. He had wanted me gone. The realization sank deeper than thirst, deeper than fear. It became something primal, a cold, burning rage buried beneath the surface of my skin. As the day dragged on, my thoughts blurred. I started talking to myself, muttering words that evaporated in the wind. Keep going, Claire. Keep walking. Don't stop. Sometimes I'd imagine I was already home, showering, drinking ice water, telling someone what happened. But the fantasy always dissolved into heat and sand. When the sun began to set, I knew I wouldn't survive another night without shelter. The temperature dropped violently. I wrapped my thin cardigan around my shoulders, curling into a hollow between two rocks. My body shook uncontrollably. My stomach twisted with hunger, but the thought of eating made me sick. I tried to pray, though I hadn't in years. Words felt strange on my tongue. "Please," I whispered. "Just let me see morning." I must have drifted in and out of sleep. The dreams were cruel. Water dripping somewhere I couldn't reach, Ethan's voice calling me softly, the sound of a car engine fading in reverse. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of coyotes in the distance. My flashlight had died hours ago. I hugged my bag to my chest, staring at the stars. They looked like eyes, cold, indifferent, watching me die. When dawn broke again, I was barely conscious. My head throbbed, and the world swayed each time I moved. The second day felt slower, heavier. Every breath scraped my throat raw. I stopped thinking about being rescued. I started thinking about dying. What would happen to my body? Would anyone ever find me? Would he? The thought of Ethan discovering what he'd done, of him living his life while I turned to bones under the desert sun, sparked something inside me. It wasn't hope. It was defiance. If I was going to die here, I wanted it to be fighting, not fading. So I stood up. My knees buckled, but I kept going. At some point that afternoon, I collapsed again, hard enough to send pain shooting through my shoulder. I lay there, face pressed against the burning earth, my breath shallow. The air above me wavered with heat, turning the sky into a smear of white and gold. I don't know how long I lay there before I noticed shadows moving in the distance. At first, I thought it was another hallucination, shapes rising from the light. But then I heard voices, real voices. "Hey, over there!" I tried to call out, but my throat made no sound. The figures grew closer. 2, maybe 3 people wearing wide-brimmed hats and backpacks. Hikers. One of them ran ahead, kneeling beside me. "Oh my God, she's alive!" a woman said. I felt her hands on my arm, cold water pressing to my lips. I drank greedily, choking, spilling most of it down my chin. The taste was the sweetest thing I'd ever known. "Don't move," another voice said. "We've got you." They spoke to me, but the words came from far away. I could barely keep my eyes open. Someone lifted my head onto a rolled-up jacket. I saw flashes, a first aid kit, a radio, the sound of static. Then darkness again. When I woke next, I was inside a tent. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and dust. An IV line ran into my arm. My lips were swollen, my skin blistered. A woman in hiking gear sat beside me, smiling softly. "Hey there," she said. "You're safe now." My voice was barely a whisper. Where am I?" "Temporary camp," she said. "We called for a rescue team. You were lucky. Another few hours and—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. I turned my head weakly. The flap of the tent was open, revealing the sun bleeding over the horizon. The same sun that had almost killed me now painted everything gold. Lucky. That's what she called me. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow. Ethan's name burned in my mind, sharp and poisonous. He had wanted me to die out there, slowly, painfully, alone. I survived. But the girl he left behind in the desert didn't. She was gone. The woman touched my hand gently. "Rest," she said. "You're safe." Safe. The word meant nothing anymore. I stared at the sky through the tent's opening, a colorless expanse stretching endlessly, just like the day he left me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My body was too weak, my emotions too drained. But inside, something shifted. Something cold, quiet, and certain. Ethan thought he'd left me to die. He was wrong. When they released me from the hospital, I didn't recognize the woman staring back from the mirror. Her skin was pale beneath the sunburn, lips cracked, eyes hollow. The nurses said I was lucky. The word kept repeating, echoing off the white walls until it lost all meaning. Lucky. Lucky to have survived 2 days in the desert. Lucky hikers found me. Lucky the dehydration hadn't killed me. No one asked why I'd been there in the first place. When the police came, I told them I'd gotten lost, a wrong turn during a photography trip. They took notes, nodded, and left. I could see it in their faces. They didn't believe me, but they didn't care enough to ask. Maybe that was for the best, because I wasn't ready to tell anyone the truth. Not yet. The truth belonged to me and to Ethan. For a week, I stayed at a cheap motel outside the city, nursing my burns and pretending to rest. At night, when sleep wouldn't come, I replayed it all. The drive, the way he'd smiled, the way he'd said, "Take a picture." Every detail sharpened in my mind until it was unbearable. I tried to imagine what he was doing right now. Was he pretending to mourn me? Or was he laughing with someone new? The thought sent a chill down my spine, even in the heat of my room. On the 7th day, I dyed my hair. Dark brown, almost black. The color felt foreign, but that was the point. The woman in the mirror wasn't Claire anymore. She was something quieter, harder. I found an old car for sale 2 blocks from the motel. Rusted, dented, barely running. Perfect. The seller didn't ask questions. I paid in cash, took the keys, and drove until the city skyline reappeared like a wound reopening. The streets looked the same, but everything inside me had shifted. Every corner, every light post, every memory felt haunted. I parked outside our old apartment first. The blinds were closed. My plants, the ones I'd cared for obsessively, were gone from the balcony. I sat there for nearly an hour, staring, until the building's door opened and someone stepped out. Ethan. My breath caught. He looked the same, maybe even better. Fresh haircut, new clothes, a new calmness in the way he walked. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. Then another figure followed him out. A girl. Younger, pretty in that effortless, breakable way. She laughed at something he said and slipped her hand into his. My heart didn't break. It froze. Jessica. I remembered the name. She'd been at a few of his work gatherings. Friendly, quiet, always smiling too long when he spoke. I used to tease him about her. "She has a crush on you," I'd said once, laughing. He'd laughed too. Now she was wearing my old hoodie. I didn't move as they got into his car, the same car he'd left me to die in, and drove off. Something inside me solidified then. A new kind of silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just watched until their taillights disappeared, and then I started the engine. Over the next few days, I became a ghost in his world. I learned his schedule, the new apartment he shared with her, where he worked, when he left, when he came back. I followed from a distance, far enough not to be noticed, close enough to feel the pulse of his new life. He was happy. That was the worst part. He looked lighter, freer, as if leaving me in the desert had unchained him. At night, I parked across the street and watched their lights go out one by one. Sometimes I saw their silhouettes through the window, her leaning against him, his head bent close to hers. I could almost hear the soft murmur of their voices, the kind I used to fall asleep to. Every sound was a knife, but with each cut, the pain turned into purpose. Revenge wasn't something I planned like a strategy. It grew in me, day by day, quiet and certain. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, not yet. I just knew he had to feel what I'd felt, to know what it meant to be left alone, terrified, abandoned by the person you trusted most. I started collecting things, old photographs of us, his letters, a few keepsakes I'd never thrown away. I looked at them not with nostalgia, but calculation. Each one was a tool, a memory I could twist into something useful later. One night, while watching their apartment from across the street, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back at me had dark eyes, calm and unreadable. There was no fear left in her, only patience. He thought he'd buried me in the desert. He was wrong. I whispered his name into the darkness, just to taste it on my tongue again. Ethan. It didn't sound like love anymore. It sounded like a promise. The first time I let him see me, it wasn't by accident. It had been 3 weeks since I returned, and I knew every detail of his routine by heart. Ethan left for work at 8:15 every morning, coffee in his left hand, phone in his right. He came back at 6:40 sharp, parking by the same lamppost. On Fridays, he ordered takeout, Chinese, always the same place. On Sundays, he and Jessica stayed in. Every pattern was predictable, mechanical. It almost disgusted me, how easily he'd built a new life over the grave of my old one. That night, I parked across the street from his apartment again. The air was cool, heavy with the smell of rain. I watched from the driver's seat, window cracked just enough for a cigarette. I don't smoke, not really. But the ember's glow was something to focus on, something to keep me grounded. Through the thin curtains of his living room, I saw movement. Jessica's shadow passed by first, then his. They were laughing. She said something I couldn't hear, and he threw his head back, carefree, the way he used to with me. The laughter twisted in my chest. I killed the cigarette, smearing the ash against the dashboard. The sound was too loud in the quiet car. For a long time, I just sat there, watching, waiting. At midnight, their lights went out. I counted to 300 before getting out of the car. My boots crunched softly on the wet pavement. I crossed the street, keeping to the edges of the light. The building's brick walls glistened from a recent drizzle. I knew exactly which window was theirs. Second floor, left corner. I stood across from it. The curtains were thin enough that I could see the shapes inside. His shape. Her shape. Two sleeping silhouettes tangled together in the same bed where I'd once fallen asleep beside him. A single pulse of fury shot through me, hot and clear. I could have screamed. I could have thrown something through that glass, but instead I smiled. He didn't know it yet, but I was home. When I finally left, I didn't go far. Just enough to park under a streetlight facing his window. I stayed there until dawn painted the buildings pink, then drove away. That evening, I came back. It was raining again, harder this time, streaking the glass in long, trembling lines. Ethan was sitting by the window typing on his laptop. Jessica wasn't home. I could tell because the light in their bedroom stayed off. He looked older somehow, or maybe just more comfortable in his new life. That's when I decided it was time. I stepped out of my car and stood still, just beyond the glow of the streetlight. The rain soaked through my jacket instantly, cold and relentless, but I didn't move. I wanted him to look up. I wanted him to feel me before he saw me. And he did. After a few minutes, he looked up from his laptop. His gaze went to the window, then froze. I saw him blink, squint, lean closer. His hand hovered midair, fingers tense. I didn't move. I let him see my face, pale, wet, framed by my new dark hair. For a moment his expression was blank, then confusion, then disbelief. He stood so fast his chair tipped over behind him. I turned away and walked back toward the shadows. The sound of the window sliding open cut through the rain. "Claire?" he shouted. His voice cracked on my name. "Claire!" I didn't answer. I walked faster, my boots slapping the pavement. When I reached my car, I got in and drove off, the wipers beating furiously. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I caught a glimpse of him in the rearview mirror, leaning out the window, drenched, staring after me. Good. Let him wonder. Let him doubt what he saw. That night, I imagined the conversation that followed. Jessica laughing it off, saying he must have dreamed it. Maybe she'd tease him about guilt or ghosts. He'd try to explain, but even he wouldn't be sure anymore. He'd start to question his own eyes. That's how it begins. Not with fear, but uncertainty. A few days later, I came back again. I parked in the same spot, waiting for him to notice me. He didn't. Not that time. But I knew the thought of me would already be living in his mind, scratching at the walls of his sleep. I wasn't haunting him yet. Not truly. I was planting something. A shadow. A possibility. For the first time since the desert, I slept peacefully. The next morning, I watched from my car as he left for work. He looked over his shoulder twice before getting in. Once at the street, once at the empty spot where I'd stood. His face was pale, his movements sharp, jittery. Jessica came out behind him, laughing, holding an umbrella. "You okay?" she asked, her voice faint through the glass. He didn't answer right away. Then he said something I couldn't hear and got into the car. As they drove off, I whispered to the rain-covered window, "You're starting to see me, Ethan." And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. It had been a week since the first time Ethan saw me. I could tell from the way he carried himself now, tense, restless, eyes darting to every reflective surface like he expected to find something behind him. Jessica noticed, of course. She asked him questions, smiled through his unease, tried to soothe whatever she thought was wrong. She had no idea what kind of ghost was creeping through their lives. I didn't follow them every day anymore. I didn't need to. My shadow was already there, stitched into his thoughts. But on the third Thursday of that month, I saw a chance too perfect to ignore. They were going to the movies. I'd overheard their plan through open windows a few nights earlier while I parked on the street below. Jessica wanted to see some romantic drama. Ethan reluctantly agreed. I waited until the evening they went, then arrived 15 minutes before them. I sat 2 rows behind where I knew they'd choose, center seats, second from the aisle. He always liked that spot, predictable to the end. The theater was dim, smelling of butter and faint mildew. Couples murmured softly in the dark, the glow of phone screens fading one by one. I kept my hood up, hair tucked inside, face hidden just enough. I wasn't there to be recognized, not yet. I was there to remind him of what he'd buried. When they entered, my pulse jumped, but I didn't move. I just watched. Jessica walked ahead, popcorn in one hand, drink in the other. Ethan followed, glancing around like a man entering enemy territory. His eyes swept the rows briefly, and for a second, they passed over me. I lowered my gaze. His shoulders stiffened just slightly. They sat down. The lights dimmed completely. The film began, some soft, sentimental nonsense about love surviving tragedy. How fitting. Half an hour passed. Jessica leaned her head against his shoulder. Ethan didn't move. His eyes, I noticed, weren't on the screen. They kept flicking left, right, back, searching. Every few minutes he turned around slightly, scanning the rows. I let him see me once. Just once. A shift of my head, the faint gleam of my face in the dark. His eyes locked on mine for barely a heartbeat. Then the crowd laughed at something on screen, and when he turned again, I was gone. I'd slid 2 seats down. He twisted in his chair, confused. Jessica whispered something, tugging on his arm. I saw his lips move. Nothing. I just thought. And then he stopped. He couldn't explain what he thought he saw. The movie droned on, but for Ethan, the real story was unfolding somewhere in the dark. By the time the credits rolled, his posture was rigid. He didn't look at Jessica when she took his hand. He looked at the exit. I left before them, blending into the crowd spilling into the lobby. The neon lights flickered above me, and the smell of rain from the parking lot cut through the popcorn staleness. Outside, I waited by the far corner, hidden behind a poster display. When they emerged, Ethan was scanning again, every movement sharp. Jessica was laughing at something on her phone, oblivious. He turned suddenly, and our eyes met across the lot. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't blink. His face went pale. He said something, maybe her name, maybe mine, and dropped the car keys. They clattered to the ground. Jessica bent to pick them up, confused. When she looked up again, I was gone. I could have watched longer, but I didn't. I wanted him to live in that confusion, that trembling moment of doubt where reality fractures just enough to hurt. I drove home slowly, rain tapping the windshield like a heartbeat. My hands didn't shake. There was no guilt, no fear, only a strange calm. The kind of calm that comes when you finally start to take back what was stolen from you. That night, I imagined Ethan lying awake, staring at the ceiling beside a sleeping Jessica, asking himself the same question again and again. Was it really her? Maybe she told him it couldn't be. Maybe she reminded him that I was lost. Maybe he agreed, just to end the conversation. But when the lights went out and the silence settled, I knew he'd open his eyes to every shadow, every flicker of movement, every whisper of wind outside the window, wondering if I was there. And sometimes I was. A few nights later, I left a small mark. Nothing dramatic. Just a single photograph slipped under their apartment door. One of the pictures from that day in the desert. The one where I stood with my back to the camera, sunlight blazing around me. No note, no message, just the image. I imagined his reaction. The moment he picked it up, the air catching in his throat, the way his pulse would quicken. Jessica would ask where it came from. He'd have no answer. I didn't need him to believe in ghosts. I needed him to remember the truth. That he'd left me out there. That I'd walked through fire and silence and death to stand here again. That night, as I parked 2 blocks away and watched their window flicker with restless light, I whispered into the dark, "Sleep well, Ethan. I'll see you soon." And for the first time, I smiled. Not out of joy, but because I could finally feel his fear breathing back toward me. It happened on a Sunday. The air smelled of rain again, the same faint metallic scent that always seemed to follow him now, like guilt carried its own weather. I knew he'd be alone that day. Jessica had gone to visit her sister. I heard her say it 2 nights earlier while I watched from my car, her voice carrying through the open balcony door. Ethan, meanwhile, hadn't been sleeping. I could tell by the way he moved, slow and unfocused, haunted by things he couldn't name. His hair was messy, his eyes darker. I almost didn't recognize him. That morning, I followed him from his apartment. He drove without direction, hands gripping the wheel too tightly, until he finally stopped at the park near the lake. The same park we used to visit when things were still good. The irony almost made me laugh. He sat on a bench overlooking the water, head bowed, elbows on his knees. I watched from across the path, hidden by a cluster of trees. The surface of the lake shimmered under the thin sunlight, reflecting his still form like a mirror. He looked small, and for the first time since the desert, I felt a flicker of pity. I pushed it away quickly. Pity was dangerous. Pity softened edges I'd worked hard to sharpen. I waited, letting the minutes stretch. Families passed, children shouted near the swings, joggers weaved through puddles. No one noticed me. No one noticed him. The world kept moving, perfectly unaware that the man on that bench was slowly unraveling. After nearly an hour, he stood and began walking along the path. I followed at a distance, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders. He kept glancing over his shoulder, searching for something he couldn't find. Then he stopped suddenly, staring out at the lake again. I stepped forward, letting him see me. For a moment, neither of us moved. The space between us felt electric, alive with everything unsaid. His expression shifted, shock, then fear, then something that almost looked like remorse. He whispered my name. I could see his lips form it even across the distance. "Claire." I didn't answer. I just stood there, letting the wind lift my hair, my coat brushing against my legs. He took one hesitant step toward me, then another. "Claire, please," he said, voice trembling. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard his footsteps breaking into a run. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the thrill of control. He called out again, louder this time, his voice cracking. "Claire, Wait! I didn't stop. By the time he reached the curve of the path, I had already slipped behind the line of trees, hidden by the parked cars along the road. From there, I watched as he spun in circles, searching the empty air. He shouted again, desperate now. Passers-by began to look at him strangely. A woman with a stroller whispered to her friend, steering clear. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, soaked in panic. When he finally gave up, he dropped onto a bench, burying his face in his hands. I sat in my car a few yards away, engine off, watching him through the windshield. He looked broken, but I wasn't satisfied yet, not even close. I waited until he finally stood and stumbled back to his car. When he drove off, I followed at a careful distance. His driving was erratic, sudden turns, hard brakes, like he was trying to lose someone. He didn't realize I was already gone from his rearview mirror long before he reached his apartment. That night, he didn't close the curtains. I saw him pacing, talking to himself, checking the windows. Jessica wasn't home yet. When she finally arrived, he rushed to her, grabbing her shoulders, pointing toward the window, shouting something I couldn't hear. She laughed. I saw it in her body language, the way she tilted her head, trying to calm him down. He shouted again. She frowned. He slammed a hand against the wall. It was working. Later, the lights went out in every room except the bedroom. I watched for a long time, waiting for movement. None came. Eventually, I drove away. I parked at the same spot by the lake and sat there in the dark, listening to the water lap softly against the shore. My reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, pale, hollow-eyed, yet calm. There was a strange beauty in it. He was breaking, piece by piece, but I wasn't sure anymore if it was revenge that fueled me or something darker, the need to exist again in his world, even as a ghost. Maybe that was what survival did to you. It rewired your heart until even pain started to feel like proof of life. I stayed there until dawn painted the horizon gray. Then I whispered into the empty car, as if the lake could carry my voice across the city. You're not done paying, Ethan. And somewhere, I hoped he felt it. The same cold emptiness I'd felt when the desert swallowed me whole. By the end of that week, Ethan looked like a ghost of his former self. His posture was hunched, his eyes carried dark rings that no sleep could erase, and his movements were erratic, sharp, panicked, suspicious. I knew the signs. I'd warned them once. He was unraveling, the same way I had in the desert. I didn't have to do much anymore. He was haunted by his own mind. All I needed to do was breathe near the edges of his world, just enough for him to feel me there. A reflection in glass, a whisper of movement behind a curtain, a shadow that didn't belong. I'd become the ghost he made of me. One night, he burst out of his apartment at 2 a.m, barefoot, shouting my name into the empty street. I watched from the alley, unseen. Jessica ran after him, terrified. He kept screaming, pointing toward the trees, insisting he'd seen me standing there. But I wasn't. Not that time. That was when I knew I'd truly gotten inside his head. Jessica tried to calm him, wrapping her arms around him as neighbors peeked through windows. He pushed her off and fell to his knees, sobbing into his hands. She led him back inside eventually, but the damage was done. The seed had bloomed. The next day, he didn't go to work. He sat by the window for hours, curtains half closed, staring at nothing. I parked 2 blocks away, watching from a distance. Every now and then, he'd glance outside like a prisoner checking for guards. I wondered if he could still taste the dust of the desert when he woke, if the air felt dry in his throat the way it had for me. Jessica left that evening. I saw her carry a suitcase out the door crying. He tried to stop her, pleading. She shook her head, shouted something that made him freeze, then left without looking back. The door slammed. I didn't know if she left for good, but part of me hoped she did. This was never her story. She was collateral, innocent maybe, or maybe just naive. When the building went dark that night, I moved closer. His window was open, the curtains fluttering weakly. I stood on the opposite side of the street, close enough to hear the faint echo of his muttering. He was talking to me. "Where are you?" he said. "Please, Claire. Please." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He switched on every light in the apartment, pacing from room to room. Then he stopped at the window again, pressing his palms to the glass, scanning the street below. He didn't see me at first. Then I stepped into the lamplight. His breath caught. I saw it. That instant recognition. That absolute terror. He stumbled backward, knocking something off a table. I stood perfectly still, the rain starting to fall again, my dark coat clinging to my frame. For a heartbeat, I let him believe I was real, flesh and blood, standing in the storm. Then I turned, melted into the darkness, and left him screaming my name into the night. By the time the police arrived, yes, he actually called them, I was long gone. The next morning, I read the rest in his posture, the exhaustion, the disbelief. He told the officers someone was following him, that his dead girlfriend was alive. They didn't believe him, of course. They searched the street, found nothing, and left with polite confusion. He spent the next few days indoors. No work, no calls, no sign of life. I watched through the cracked blinds of my car as he began to drink. Bottles piled by the window. Food delivery bags stacked near the door. His eyes, when I caught glimpses of them, were wild and unfocused. The haunting was complete. Yet the strangest thing happened. Watching him decay didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it would. It wasn't joy or victory. It was something quieter, something empty. I was watching a man dissolve, yes, but I was also watching the last thread between us snap, strand by strand. He'd stopped being Ethan, the man who left me to die. He was now a shell, and I was the ghost who built him that way. Late one night, I walked up to the apartment building again. The hallway smelled of old paint and stale air. His door was slightly ajar. I didn't enter, not yet. I just stood there, listening. The TV buzzed faintly inside, the light flickering across the walls. I heard him muttering again, quieter now. My name, over and over, like a prayer. "Claire, Claire, please, I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, leaning against the wall. For a moment, I felt tears sting my eyes, not for him, but for the version of myself who had once loved him enough to die for him. That girl was gone. I'd buried her in the sand he left me in. When I opened my eyes again, I whispered through the crack in the door, "I'm still here." He gasped, a sharp, broken sound, and then everything went silent. I walked away before he could reach the door. By the time the first light of dawn crept across the street, Ethan was standing at the window again, hollow-eyed and shaking. He looked like a man who'd seen his own ghost, and in a way, he had. It wouldn't be long now. The mind can only survive so much before it turns against itself. And I was patient. I didn't see him for a week. Not because I couldn't, but because I wanted to know what silence would do to him. When I finally returned to the street outside his apartment, the curtains were closed, the car unmoved, the mailbox overflowing. The world had shrunk around him. I could almost feel it in the air, that thick, heavy quiet that lingers around despair. Through the narrow gap in the blinds, I saw him once. He was pacing in the dark, talking to no one. His beard had grown in uneven patches. His clothes looked slept in. Bottles littered the table. I could hear him muttering, that same rhythm over and over like a prayer. My name. It used to hurt to hear it. Now it just sounded hollow. A few nights later, I parked down the block and waited, headlights off. I didn't know why I was there anymore. Maybe to witness the final act. Maybe to make sure he didn't escape it. Around midnight, an ambulance arrived. 2 paramedics went inside with the building manager. 10 minutes later, they came out carrying Ethan. He was conscious. Barely. His eyes rolled toward the night sky, unfocused, his body limp in their hands. One of the medics asked something, and he murmured a reply. I couldn't hear it, but I could imagine what he said. Maybe my name again. Maybe a plea. The siren wailed as the doors shut. I watched the red lights fade into the distance, then started my car and followed, keeping far enough back that they wouldn't notice. When they turned into the hospital parking lot, I stopped at the far edge of the street and watched through the rain. They wheeled him inside under the harsh white glow of fluorescent lights. For the first time, I saw fear on his face, not fear of me, but of himself. It was almost poetic. The next morning, I went inside. No disguise, no hood. I walked the sterile corridors like any visitor might, calm, unnoticed, invisible. A nurse at the desk was talking softly to a doctor. I caught fragments. Acute psychosis, sleep deprivation, paranoid delusions. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew. When I found his room, the door was slightly open. I stood just beyond the threshold, unseen. Ethan sat on the bed, wearing a hospital gown, wrists wrapped in white gauze. His hands trembled as he lifted a cup of water to his lips. A faint bruise marked his temple. His eyes were empty, not frightened anymore, not angry, just gone. There was a drawing taped to the wall beside him, a crude sketch the doctor must have asked him to make. It was me, or something that looked like me, a rough, uneven figure with black hair and blank eyes. Underneath it, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were the words, "She's out there." I stared at it until I couldn't anymore. A nurse came in and spoke softly, asking if he wanted breakfast. He didn't answer. She set the tray down and left. He just kept staring at the wall, whispering to himself. I wanted to speak. I wanted to walk in and say, "I'm not a ghost, Ethan. I'm flesh and blood. You made me this." But I didn't. He was already living the punishment I'd planned. Every sleepless night, every glimpse of me, every whisper of his own conscience had led him here. This white room, this silence, this madness. Still, something in me hesitated. Watching him, I realized how thin the line between us had become. He looked like I had looked once, empty, hollowed out, lost inside the maze of his own thoughts. Was I really different? The thought burned. I pushed it away, clutching the door frame until my knuckles went white. A doctor appeared beside me, startling me. "You're here for him?" she asked. Her tone was gentle but wary. I shook my head. "No," I said quickly. "Wrong room." She nodded, already half distracted, and walked past me. I turned and left before my voice could betray me. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, almost innocent. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the hospital entrance. Through the glass doors, I saw 2 orderlies wheel a meal cart past his room. For a second, I almost convinced myself to leave a note. Something simple, something final. But no, he didn't deserve closure. Not yet. As I drove away, the city blurred in the fading light. The streets looked strange now, familiar places stripped of meaning. I passed a cafe we used to go to, an old bookstore we'd loved. Each memory flickered like a dying bulb, one last trace of the life we'd shared. I'd won, technically. He was broken, his mind shattered, his future erased. So why did it feel like I'd lost something too? I pulled over by the river and stepped out of the car. The water was dark and slow, the sky reflected in its rippling surface. I thought about the desert, the silence, the heat, the moment I realized he'd never come back. He had left me to die, and somehow I'd become what he made of me. I stood there until the cold crept into my bones. Then I whispered to the river the way I had to the sand once. "It's almost over." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if I believed it. I waited a month before I went back. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted time to make sure the silence around him had truly settled. Hospitals are strange places. Everything feels suspended there, as if time forgets to move. I knew he was still inside. The local paper ran a small story about a man hospitalized for nervous collapse after a prolonged episode of paranoia. They never used his name, but I recognized the details. When I finally walked through those sliding glass doors, the world seemed too bright, too sterile. The air smelled like bleach and hopelessness. A nurse at the reception desk smiled politely. "Visiting hours are until 8, she said. "I know," I replied. My voice was calm, controlled. "I'm here for Ethan Cole." She glanced at her screen, then nodded toward the east wing. "Room 214. Keep it brief. He's been fragile." Fragile. That was one word for it. The hallway stretched endlessly, lined with doors that all looked the same. I passed a few patients shuffling aimlessly, faces blank, lost in their own ghosts. For the first time since the desert, I felt the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. Room 214 was at the end of the corridor. The door was half open. He was sitting by the window wearing the same thin hospital clothes I'd seen before. His hair was longer now, unkempt. He'd lost weight. His hands twitched occasionally on his lap. When I stepped inside, he didn't turn at first. Then he heard the sound of my shoes on the linoleum and looked up. His eyes widened. His lips parted, trembling. "Claire." I closed the door behind me. The click echoed like a gunshot. "Yes," I said softly. "It's me." He blinked rapidly, as if trying to decide whether I was real or another hallucination. His face crumpled. "You're dead," he whispered. I moved closer, the heels of my boots silent on the floor. "No, Ethan, you just tried to make me that way." He recoiled, pressing his back against the wall. I thought. You thought you could leave me there," I said, my voice steady. "In the desert. Alone. No one would find me. You'd drive home, start over, pretend I never existed. Isn't that right?" Tears filled his eyes. "I don't know why I did it," he said. I can't even remember what I was thinking. I just wanted to be free. You were..." He stopped, choking on the words. "Too much?" I asked. "Too alive? Too real?" He shook his head violently. "Please, Claire, please tell me you're not..." "Not what?" I stepped closer until I stood right in front of him. He could smell the rain still clinging to my coat. "Not real? Look at me." He did. His fingers twitched toward me, hesitant, trembling. When they brushed my sleeve, he flinched as though it burned. "You're real," he breathed. "I am." He started crying then, broken, gasping sobs that filled the room. I didn't move to comfort him. I just watched. "I wanted you to feel what I felt," I said quietly. "Left alone. No one coming back for you. The silence, the fear, the way the world stops mattering when you realize no one's coming to save you. He shook his head, rocking back and forth. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I swear, I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "That's why it's over." He looked up sharply, confusion flashing across his face. "Over?" "Yes." I turned toward the window. Beyond the glass, the city glowed faintly in the dusk. "I've spent months turning into your ghost, but I'm not her anymore." "You can't leave," he said suddenly, voice rising. "You can't just walk away now. You can't." I turned back to him. His expression was frantic, almost childlike. I realized then that he wasn't pleading with me. He was pleading with the image of me that had taken over his mind. He didn't know where the real world ended anymore. That, I thought, was punishment enough. "I already left you once," I said softly. "You just didn't notice." He reached out again, desperate, but I stepped back. His hand hung in the air, shaking. "Goodbye, Ethan." He stared at me as if I'd taken something vital from him, something he needed to breathe. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Anywhere you can't follow," I said. "Someplace quiet." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent light above. Then I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. "Claire!" he shouted behind me, voice cracking. "Please, don't leave me here." I didn't turn around. His cries followed me down the corridor, growing smaller with each step. Nurses rushed past me toward his room, but I kept walking until the sound faded completely. When I reached the lobby, the nurse at the desk smiled politely again, unaware of the storm unraveling upstairs. "Did you find who you were visiting?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "He's resting now." Outside, the night air felt cold but clean. The city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. I walked until the hospital was just another shape in the distance. For the first time since that day in the desert, I felt light. Empty, but alive. The kind of emptiness that comes after a wound finally stops bleeding. Somewhere behind me, Ethan was still calling my name, maybe in his mind, maybe in his sleep. But that voice no longer belonged to my world. I looked up at the sky. The same stars that once mocked me in the desert were faint tonight, blurred by the city glow. I thought of the woman I used to be, trusting, hopeful, foolish, and I whispered a quiet farewell to her too. She was gone, and I was free.